All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to the Step Up webinar on preventing and tackling femicide. I am Andrada Filip, Project Coordinator at WAVE, and will be presenting today. I would like to thank you for taking the time to be a part of this webinar today. I hope that it will be beneficial to your organization and look forward to the knowledge sharing that will occur today. The webinar session is planned to run from 1 p.m. to 2. Depending on how the questions and answers session goes at the end, we may even end a little before 2 p.m. Here is the agenda for the webinar. I would like to just ask you to quickly read through the agenda of the webinar, which has also been emailed to you along with a PDF of the presentation. You can refer to this in case of any kind of technical difficulties. I will also go over some housekeeping rules so that we can share information while also keeping it organized. I will take a few minutes to introduce myself and then begin the presentation by quickly going over several definitions on femicide. This will be followed by a short discussion on the topic of femicide and why it is important to raise awareness of this global problem. My presentation should take about 25 minutes. Afterwards, I will take questions and comments from the audience. Here is some information concerning the technical aspects. As an audience member, you are automatically muted. I will keep the muting on until the end of the presentation, after which you will be able to ask questions during the questions and answers part of the webinar. I am not able to see you even if your webcam is on and you are not able to see me. If you cannot see the PowerPoint, then please simply leave the webinar by clicking the X at the top right of your screen. You can join the webinar again by clicking the link in your confirmation email. I also want to inform you that the webinar is being recorded. We have a few house rules that should make the webinar enjoyable for everyone. First, have a listen to my presentation. If you have any questions during this time, please feel free to type them into the questions pane. I will then answer your questions at the end of my presentation. During the questions and answers part, I will not be able to unmute everyone at the same time, but I can unmute individual participants. So if you have a question or a comment, then please raise your electronic hand and then I will invite you to give us your question or commentary. Lastly, I hope you will enjoy this webinar. I would like to briefly introduce myself now. My name is Andrada Filip and I'm working as Project Coordinator at WAVE. I first joined the WAVE office in September 2015. I have been researching the topic of femicide for quite some time now, and I'm looking forward to sharing my knowledge with you, as well as hearing about your opinions and experiences. All right, let's proceed now with the presentation. Scores of women are being killed every year by their intimate partners, be it in the public or private sphere, under circumstances which are often labeled as family or domestic violence. Thousands more are targeted in conflict zones by insurgent groups, captured and enslaved, abused and exposed to horrendous brutalities before being killed. Millions of women have perished during the past decades in India. due to the practice of selective abortion, a phenomenon which some have called the silent genocide, because many families prefer to have a male child instead of a female one. A report of the UN Secretary General from 2006 stated that prenatal sex selection and infanticide have accounted for 500,000 girls gone missing every year in India for the past 2 decades. Furthermore, according to UN estimates, between 113 million and 200 million women are demographically missing worldwide. Many other women in several countries across the world are forced to undergo harmful practices such as female genital mutilation, breast ironing, or forced feeding in order to make them conform to patriarchal social rules and expectations that undermine their human dignity and attribute them an inferior social position and value. Very often the girls and women subjected to these harmful practices end up dying as a result. To be more precise, it is estimated that over 130 million girls and women alive today have undergone FGM, mainly in Africa and some countries in the Middle East. In other places, lesbian or transgender women are brutally murdered for having transgressed gendered roles and refused to adhere to the social rules imposed by the majority. All these heinous crimes committed against women because of their gender have a name: femicide. The academic Diana Russell was the one who coined the term femicide back in the 1970s at the International Tribunal on Crimes Against Women, and it refers to the intentional killing of females by males because they are females. In the book co-edited by Radford and Russell, Femicide, The Politics of Woman Killing, it is stated that femicide has many different forms, be it racist femicide, homophobic femicide, or lesbicide, marital femicide, femicide committed outside the home by a stranger, serial, or mass femicide. The aim of this new term was to raise awareness that the violent death of a woman was a crime per se, not to be confused with the gender-neutral term homicide. It had a political purpose, as it intended to produce effects in the way in which violent deaths of women had been understood and produce changes in the social order which legitimized or tolerated those deaths. Professor Rashida Manjoo, the former UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, elaborated on this definition in her thematic reports. She argued that femicide is the extreme manifestation of existing forms of violence against women. Gender-related killings are not isolated incidents which arise suddenly and unexpectedly, but are rather the ultimate act of violence which is experienced in a continuum of violence. Furthermore, she contends that femicide can be perpetrated directly or indirectly, and identified an extensive set of categories. The direct category includes killings as a result of intimate partner violence, sorcery, witchcraft-related killings, honor-related killings, armed conflict-related killings, dowry-related killings, gender identity and sexual orientation-related killings, and ethnic and indigenous identity-related killings. The indirect category includes deaths due to poorly conducted or clandestine abortions, maternal mortality, deaths from harmful practices, deaths linked to human trafficking, drug dealing, organized crime, and gang-related activities. The death of girls or women from simple neglect through starvation or ill treatment, and deliberate acts or omissions by the state. The alternative term feminicide has become more widespread throughout Latin America, where the anthropologist Marcela Lagarde has elaborated its theoretical background. According to this perspective, feminicide directly implies the idea of state responsibility, as state institutions have failed to take adequate measures to prevent the culmination of violence and abuse into the death of a woman. Thus, feminicide is seen as a crime perpetrated by the state by not complying with its due diligence obligations to prevent, prosecute, and investigate such crimes. Throughout the last 15 years, Mexican cities along the US border, particularly Ciudad Juarez, have caught the attention of the world media due to the high incidence of femicide, largely caused by an environment conducive to crime and drug trafficking. There is currently no reliable, comprehensive global data covering all types of femicide, and it is difficult to compare existing national statistics. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime provides global estimates on intimate partner homicides in its report from 2013. UNODC data from the Global Study on Homicide 2013 indicates that violence frequently escalates into the killing of women and girls, whereby intimate and family-related violence is on the rise. UNODC research also points out that in 2012, more than 43,000 women were killed by an intimate partner or a family member worldwide, representing almost 4 times the number of people killed by terrorism worldwide that same year. To be more precise, 43,600 is the number of women and girls killed by a family member or an intimate partner worldwide in 2012. 11,133 is the total number of people killed by terrorism worldwide that same year. Since femicide represents the culmination of various manifestations of violence against women, it is important to also talk about the prevalence of violence against women and domestic violence. A survey published by the UN Fundamental Rights Agency in 2014 gives us a comprehensive account of how widespread violence against women is in the 28 EU member states. The report is based on interviews with 42,000 women across the 28 member states of the European Union. It shows that violence against women, and specifically gender-based violence that disproportionately affects women, is an extensive human rights abuse that the EU cannot afford to overlook. The FRA survey on violence against women is the first survey of its kind to capture the scope and nature of violence against women in all 28 EU member states, using the same questionnaire with the same mode of application and based on random sampling. The results indicate that 1 woman in 3 in the European Union has experienced physical and/or sexual violence since the age of 15. The Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Abuse, also known as the Istanbul Convention, is a binding legal instrument which obliges parties to take the necessary measures to promote and protect the rights of women to live free from violence in both the public and the private sphere. It is by far the most comprehensive binding legal instrument which protects the rights of women and addresses the phenomenon of violence against women in a holistic manner. It also introduces a set of obligations for states in accordance with the due diligence principle to take the necessary measures to prevent, investigate, punish, and provide reparations for such acts of violence against women. The Convention entered into force in August 2014. So far, 23 countries have ratified the Convention, including 14 EU member states: Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Finland, France, Italy, Malta, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovenia, Spain, and Sweden. The other 14 EU member states have all signed the Convention. The European Union has recently signed the Istanbul Convention on June 13, 2017, sending a strong political message to all EU member states. Notable articles from the Convention that are particularly relevant to the prevention of femicide are Article 22 on the establishment of specialist support services, Article 23 on shelters, Article 24 on helplines, and last but not least, Article 14 on education, and 15 on the training of professionals. The Inter-American Convention on the Prevention, Punishment, and Eradication of Violence Against Women, also known as the Convention of Belém do Pará, adopted in 1994, represents another relevant legal instrument which calls on states to establish mechanisms for protecting and defending women's rights and for combating violence against women in the public and in the private sphere. Articles 1 and 2 of the Convention cover a wide range of manifestations of violence against women, including femicide. And Article 7 introduces a set of duties for states to pursue, by all appropriate means and without delay, policies to prevent, punish, and eradicate such violence. As of August 2012, it has been ratified by 32 of the 35 states of the Organization of American States. Lastly, 2 resolutions on the gender-related killings of women and girls, which is the term used by the UN when referring to femicide, have been adopted in the General Assembly in 2013 and 2015. I will now talk about the importance of identifying risk factors for femicide. Specialist support services for women, such as helplines, shelters, or centers, are essential when it comes to preventing this extreme manifestation of violence against women and supporting women subjected to violence and abuse. Practitioners working in such facilities are encouraged to conduct risk assessments. It is important to bear in mind, though, that checklists do not represent a definite assessment of risk. These rather serving as guidance for practitioners, indicating on which issues they should focus on when carrying out the risk assessment. The following represent a non-exhaustive set of risk factors associated with intimate partner femicide. History of violence, prior physical violence and threats, separation from an abusive partner after cohabitation, a woman having a child by a previous partner living in the home, forced sex, possession of a firearm, jealousy of an abusive partner, abuse during pregnancy, stalking, controlling behavior, and isolation, precarious financial situation such as unemployment, substance abuse such as drugs, or alcohol. The Ni Una Menos movement that originated in Argentina in 2015 put the issue of femicide in the limelight and attracted the world's attention, challenging the government to intensify its efforts on ending and preventing such violence. The symbolic power of so many women standing together proves that focusing on victims does not mean portraying women as passive. These protests have given women a name and a face and presence in death, when their killers and society more broadly objectified or ignored them. They have shown that violence is not only the result of inequality and discrimination, but also a mechanism perpetuating such problems. In November 2016, a huge demonstration against male violence took place on the streets of Rome. Attended by over 200,000 people, the demonstration brought together feminists, women's NGOs, supporters of the LGBTQ movement, and citizens who share the common objective of stopping violence against women. Under the slogan, Non una di meno, which emerged out of solidarity with the Argentinian slogan, Ni una más, this new feminist wave has a common voice: to stop violence against women and end discrimination against women in all its forms. Let us now go over the contributions made by WAVE in this field. WAVE has made substantial contributions in the area of preventing violence against women and femicide, training practitioners and disseminating information to policymakers and the public at large. WAVE has been making sustained efforts to prevent femicide throughout the past couple of years. A number of training materials have been elaborated by WAVE in partnership with other experts on how to identify and protect high-risk victims of gender-based violence, conduct risk assessment, and strengthen multi-agency cooperation. These four training manuals, Protect 1, Protecting High-Risk Victims from 2011, Protect 2, Risk Assessment and Safety from 2012, Gender Stat Guidance from 2012, and Effective Multi-Agency Cooperation from 2015 make an important contribution in building up the capacities of practitioners and other actors from criminal justice systems across Europe to better support victims of gender-based violence and take the necessary measures to avoid the culmination of such violence into femicide. Furthermore, in 2016, WAVE has conducted a training on preventing femicide and repeat violence against women, applying a victim-centered and rights-based approach in multi-agency work to empower survivors and prevent violence. The event was attended by 20 practitioners from EU and non-EU member states working in women's organizations. On the 25th of November 2016, the OSCE Gender Section, in cooperation with WAVE, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, the Academic Council on the United Nations System, and the Office of the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, organized a symposium that addressed the need to combat femicide and conduct systematic data collection, documentation, and analysis of such crimes. The need of having a model for data collection that can be applied by various states had been brought up during the discussions. Furthermore, such mechanisms ought to be implemented at the national level first, since it is the duty of states to collect data on femicide under the requirements of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now I would like to talk to you about 3 best practices developed by members of the WAVE network in the field of data collection on femicide. The Femicide Census from the UK, the Femicide Monitoring Project from the Republic of Ireland, and the report on femicide in Armenia, published by the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Women, of which the Women's Support Center from Armenia is a member. The Femicide Census. This is a best practice in the field of data collection on femicide, developed by Karen Ingala Smith in partnership with Women's Aid Federation England. The Femicide Census is a database currently containing information on almost 1,000 women killed by men in England and Wales since 2009. The Femicide Census collates the dates of hundreds of femicides committed by men to explore whether lessons can be learned by viewing these cases together. The initial analysis presented in their first report published in November 2016 finds that these are not isolated incidents, since too many of them followed a similar pattern of violence and were premeditated. Data analyzed from the Femicide Census showed that many femicides were committed in similar settings, where similar weapons were used, and similar relationships existed between the perpetrators and victims. By highlighting the trends in cases of femicide, their report further points out that through social, institutional, and state changes, instances of femicide can be reduced, if not completely prevented. Here are some key findings from data recorded between January 1st, 2009 and December 31st, 2015. The killings of women and girls by men are not isolated incidents. It is known that 936 women were killed by men in England and Wales. Most women who are killed by a man known to them. 598, that is 64% of women, were killed by men identified as current or former partners. Women are at significant risk at the point of separation from an abusive partner. The Femicide Monitoring Project. This best practice was developed by Women's Aid Ireland and spans across 20 years of intense work involving minute data collection by tracking the homicides of women in national newspaper records and also gathering homicide data from the Gardaí, which is the Irish National State Police, to ensure that cases which were not reported in the newspapers were not missed. Their first report was published in November last year, containing a detailed analysis of the femicides recorded throughout the 20-year period. This has enabled Women's Aid to identify similar patterns of behavior regarding perpetrators and the series of risk factors for femicide, such as attempted strangulation and assault with knives. The report also issued a set of recommendations to state agencies on how to prevent the culmination of violence against women and domestic abuse into femicide. It is thus emphasized that the increased recognition and management of risk factors for intimate partner homicide would lead to an improved response to domestic abuse by the state and its agencies. Here are some key findings from data recorded between 1996 and 2016. Since the beginning of 1996, 209 women have died violently in the Republic of Ireland. 131 women, that is 63%, were killed in their own homes. Where the cases have been resolved, 89 women, that is 54%, were murdered by a current or former male intimate partner. 54 women, that is 33%, were killed by a male relative or acquaintance, and 21 women were murdered by a stranger. The report from Armenia. According to the findings presented in the report from Armenia, since 2010, at least 40 women have been killed by former or current intimate partners and family members. Their children have been left motherless as a consequence of these murders. Impunity for the killings of women is a global concern. Perpetrators of femicide have been largely unpunished or subject to light sentences, and only a handful have been jailed, contributing to the perpetuation of gender-based violence in the country. Statistics on intimate partner femicide are not easily obtainable in the former Soviet Union, including Armenia, as most state agencies do not disaggregate data on violence in the family based on gender. Between 2010 and 2015, the majority of femicide victims were between the ages of 20 and 40 and lived in a rural area with a perpetrator at the time of the murder. At this point, I would like to bring up a relevant tool for the investigation and prosecution of femicide. The UN Human Rights Office, in collaboration with UN Women, has developed a model protocol to guide investigations and prosecutions launched in the wake of gender-based murders of women in Latin America. The Latin American Model Protocol for the Investigation of Gender-Related Killings of Women is a practical tool designed to be applied by the people responsible for carrying out the investigation and prosecution of these acts. Its main objective is to offer guidance and lines of action to improve the practice of those working in the justice system, forensic experts, and other specialized persons, including those acting in relation to the crime scene, the case analysis, the formulation of the indictment, or before the court. The Femicide Watch. In 2015, Professor Dubravka Simonovic, UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Its Causes and Consequences, called for the establishment of femicide watches or observatories on violence against women, which should collect data on femicide and analyze, with the assistance of interdisciplinary review panels, all cases including court decisions, in order to identify gaps in the intervention system, criminal justice, and criminal procedure system, as well as risk factors to prevent and protect women and girls from those killings. The purpose of the Femicide Watch. Accurate and systematic data collection in this field, disaggregated by age, sex, and the relationship between victims and perpetrators, is urgently needed. Femicide watches should be given a clear mandate to analyze and collect data in order to identify gaps and failures in existing national support systems. Last but not least, a femicide should be used as a prevention mechanism. I would now like to mention some recommendations that were developed by an intergovernmental, open-ended expert group meeting which met in Bangkok in November 2014. These recommendations envisage practical measures that can be implemented by governments to more effectively prevent, investigate, prosecute, and punish femicide. Review and update legislation. Review, evaluate, and update national laws to effectively address femicide, including, where appropriate, by providing for specific offenses or aggravating circumstances, and by reviewing legislation to ensure that it does not include discriminating factors, such as passion, violent emotion, honor, or provocation, that allow perpetrators to escape criminal responsibility. Develop capacity. Strengthen the capacity of criminal justice institutions to prevent, investigate, prosecute, punish, and remedy femicide, including by assessing the effectiveness of laws, implementing training programs and awareness campaigns, identifying gender stereotypes and discrimination within institutions, providing adequate sanctions for discrimination, sexual misconduct, and other misconduct, and ensuring that measures are taken to address them. Promoting the recruitment, employment, and appropriate working conditions of women in the legal and law enforcement professions, especially at the decision-making level. Enhance coordination between all stakeholders. Promote and enhance coordination at all levels of government between institutions mandated to prevent, investigate, prosecute, punish, and remedy femicide, as well as coordination with other relevant sectors, including civil society and the education, health, social services, and security sectors. Focus on qualitative, quantitative data. Strengthen the collection, analysis, dissemination of qualitative and quantitative data on femicide and other forms of violence against women, focusing on factors such as age, racial and ethnic origin, criminal history of perpetrators, the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, modus operandi, context and motive, taking special care to include reports on violence in rural and marginalized areas, the situation of specific groups of women and victims. Alright, so the presentation has now ended. Just to let you know, the video of this webinar will be made available in a few weeks. If you have any more questions or comments, please raise your electronic hands now. You can also still write it in the questions pane if you don't feel like speaking. You could also share good practices from your experience. I'll go ahead and give you a minute to think about any questions. I see that there are no questions at the moment. In any case, feel free to email me any questions you can think of. I'll be happy to answer them in the next couple of days. I would like to thank you for attending this webinar, and I hope you have found the inputs provided useful. Lastly, I wish to invite you to participate in our upcoming webinar. I will email you my PowerPoint presentation in the next couple of days. Goodbye and have a pleasant afternoon.